Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Altered Carbon, Season 1, Episode 4, Force of Evil. 4 of Evil. Episode 4 of Evil. Never mind, I tried to do something that didn't work out. Just trying to make light of things, because in this episode there's a lot of torture, and it's pretty rough. It's pretty fucking rough, guys. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Renate for commissioning this episode. Also, Renate, I just want to say thank you for throwing a, trigger warning in the chat on Discord, because I saw it and it really helped to be prepared for what this episode was going to be. I should have realized what we were going to be in for based on how he got gripped up and taken away. But nevertheless, it was like a little bit on my mind that the next episode would be him fighting his way out of the situation. And I didn't expect him to be in it as long as he had been, until I saw your message, and then I was like, oh, okay, so we're gonna be doing this. So yeah, it's it certainly isn't as bad as it could be. Like, I know that there are a lot of other movies and shows out there that can get even more intense with this stuff, and I'm not trying to say that if I hadn't been warned I would have turned it off or anything like that, but there's just a sort of like headspace that you get into when you know you're about to see something kind of heavy. And if you aren't ready for that, it can be a little bit like more upsetting. And this is how I can feel with like domestic violence stuff as well, or sexual assault. So, yeah, it just helps. So I'm going to start at the beginning here. Because the way that this opens, we're in this like this space that is extremely sterile. It's kind of giving like combo of, it's like somebody took over an old office building and tried to make it look as much like an Apple store as they could. So it's mostly whites, silvers, and there's a little bit of like a natural wood look on one side. I am kind of fascinated by the set design on this show, and would be really interested in hearing what exactly, because like we're working with some natural materials with these being human beings, but mostly it all feels so unnatural that having this one strip of natural wood, I can't help but see as like a deliberate choice in that direction of just being like, when we're pointing towards the bodies, that's when we see something that is a slightly warmer tone and that is actually from nature. And when we're pointing away from the bodies towards their desk, that is when everything is the most blank, white, crisp, and sterile. And we also, guys, this is just so awful. This poor girl. We see Anemone, and she's on this table. I think that this is a doll. She is done pretty fucking convincingly, but she doesn't quite look like herself. So I think that this is a model. But she has been pulled apart, and we see later basically all of like her organs have been harvested, and she is totally hollowed out. And just like the utter disposability of her as a person is really, really upsetting. So what we find out over the course of this episode is that due to the way that we have been able to make souls digital, is Digital Souls like a band name? Because I feel like it should be, or like an album name would also be quite good, I feel. But the fact that they can be sent into artificial space has opened up a whole new arena in terms of interrogation and torture, because it used to be you had to do a enough damage to get somebody talking, but not enough so that they died. But now, with the exciting new things we've got going on, we can have the pressure of pain, the terror of death, like the experience of it. But then we can bring somebody right back to life and do it all over again for infinity until they eventually, inevitably, break. I'm just going to tell you guys, and I've said this on many shows, but I always say it again just in case whoever's listening hasn't listened to my other shows. If somebody tried to torture me, they wouldn't have to. I would instantly perish by just pure fear, or I would talk, tell them everything they needed to know. If you are somebody who has a secret that you do not want shared, don't tell me it, because I will tell under minimum pressure. You just show me a baseball bat or like a pair of pliers. I'll get the picture, and that's it. You get to tell. You get to know everything. I am not. Now the problem becomes: what if you're dealing with a person who isn't here for the information, really? Who's here for the experience of getting to torture you? Well, then that's just my bad luck. But in an effort to avoid this, I will instantly cave. I am not ashamed of it. Pain. Uh, I have a lower pain tolerance than average anyway. I already am aware of this. So I am not going to try and play like I could withstand more than the average person. And the fact that there are people out there who can, how do you do that? Like, how? It's just got to be pure training. It's just got to be that you just become used to it, and it is as nothing. And we see them getting trained to go through it and understand that in this episode, and it still kind of feels to me like, yeah, but how though? Like, it's still not exactly, it doesn't I can't help but feel like your pain tolerance is just kind of your pain tolerance, isn't it? Is there a way to change that? Can you? Like, do you know what I'm saying? I just keep sort of coming up against how learning to deal with pain is a different thing than not feeling it. So I guess that's what we're doing, is just learning how to cope rather than changing our actual tolerance. Anyway, Candace says, I know this about you and love you anyway. And this is why I'd only ever ask you to be my uninformed getaway driver and not my assistant in crime. Yeah. Yeah, it's tragic. Like, if I were to be given like the hypothetical, I'm trying to, for a friend, plan the perfect murder, I would have a lot of fun doing that. And if I'm distant enough from you, perhaps the cops wouldn't even think to ask me about you. But I feel like I'm up in Candace's phone way too much. If something happened, they would definitely come to me and be like, "What's up?" Um so anyway, this the way that this, you guys, I cannot. The way that this is all done is we've got Kovac in a like creepy room. Okay, so part of what I love about this is that the room he is in is the room in which he last died. I am assuming they picked this on purpose for the trauma of it. And the dude that came and got him last time with the fucking hair is here. But it turns out that this is the Russian dude that he killed, like in a different skin. And bro is so unhinged because he has been in a bunch of different sleeves, and he's not coping super well with it anymore. You know, it's unclear how much of this is due to being in this program, but I think it's meant to be that, like, the stack they're using is corrupted. So, how does this manifest when he is actually in his sleeve, in the real? I don't know. So, when I said I love this, there's a couple of moments throughout this episode where we see these little icons when they're determining what kind of torture is going to happen next. And y'all, there's like, for the flame torture, a little like fire icon with a smiley face on it. When it's these like creatures that get sent into his belly button, it's like a little present box emoji. Like, honestly, it's so fucked up, and it's also really funny, and it's also hideous. Like, it's such a common, it makes sense that it would be designed this way. And like, these dudes who are part of this, they really seem to not see themselves as culpable in any of it, despite the fact that they are very much like part of planning this all out and programming it. They just see themselves as completely separate. So later on, when things go a bit left and they're trying to say, I just work here, you don't, though. It seems like you kind of assist in like building this. And when the extra secret code that has the creatures inside that little box is mentioned, both of these dudes brighten considerably. Like, they have just been told that they are going to get to have a pizza party today. So these are not people who are okay. And it's not surprising the way that they talk about, like, one of them says something about how he's asking out this girl who has these tits, and he does the like boob gesture. And his friend says something like, Miles, God, they told you in sensitivity training not to talk about women that way. And there is something so beautiful about the fact that this job comes with sensitivity training. Like, there's, it's something that I feel like it could easily kind of fly by if you aren't paying attention to the overall view of what's going on here. But just stop and think about it, that their job is to find the most efficient way to torture people, but they still have sensitivity training. Why? What? This is a business in such a very cold-blooded way. It is absolutely obscene. Like, ugh. Anyway, so let's get on to the torture. He is getting the shit beat out of him, and he is in a reality in which his body hasn't got the capabilities that his other body has. He doesn't have the muscle memory, the training, so he is slower to react. He doesn't know how to fight back, defend himself, all of this. I thought, like, I couldn't help but think about this, the idea of like going through all of this training your whole life and developing all these skills, and then somebody can just drop you into a reality so you all of that is utterly irrelevant to you. um so this is all like interspersed with us bouncing out of this reality into the real, and thank God, it really does help to break things up. Then we go over to the hotel, the Raven, and Poe and Vernon, they are talking. Vernon is getting very frustrated because the footage that he found to look through, uh there is nothing there he apparently has been poring over it for quite a while. And he says the night before Lizzie was found in that alley, 3 hours are missing from the Sun Touch surveillance. I need to see her. Maybe she'll talk to me again and tell me what happened. And Poe says, but if you intervene now, she may become worse than before. But when he spins around to face Poe, Poe is in a half of a sugar skull face paint and carrying a giant sugar skull with like a flower arrangement in it. Honestly, this is all extremely dope. Um and it's interesting because like they are very much in this culture playing Dia de los Muertos and Dia de los Muertos or Dia de Muertos. I feel like it's Dia de Muertos is what I hear most often without the los. Um because like honestly in Spanish they pull los out of stuff a lot. And so they'll just say a thing plural and the los is sort of like implied almost, if that makes sense. Um anyway, it doesn't matter. But they're really talking about them as if this and All Hallows Eve are the same thing. Nobody says Halloween ever. I never heard that word. All I heard was All Hallows or Dia de Muertos. And indeed, it turns out that my thinking on this in the last episode is partially correct, that there is a tradition of spinning up relatives again. And it does not seem like they are aware that time has passed. Like I was sort of thinking of it as you're languishing in a drawer on your stack with no sort of stimulation for a year in between. But it seems like you're brought back and the amount of time that has passed doesn't really feel like anything to you, which I guess is for the best. And I the story that we get when we are with Ortega is actually like really moving and sweet, despite the fact that there's a fucking skinhead involved, which is amazing. It's such a fun, you guys, the idea that there is this guy who is so proud of his race when bodies mean so little in this world. It feels like a relic. You know, how many people actually even give a shit about race anymore at this point when it's so clear that anybody could be in any skin? How much does it matter now? I would be very, very interested to know because, like, clearly we've still got some racists as guys around, but, like, how prevalent is this? Is there I have to assume there's a much higher demand for white sleeves, though, right? So probably that's the way that like racism manifests now is like the sleeve market and cloning and how all of that works. Like I could see there being a much more eugenics driven racism than it's always been about eugenics ultimately, but there has previously been this sort of mask over it. And I feel like now we would be getting much more down to the actual, like, nitty gritty of what racism is in this world. Um, so, okay. This, I jumped ahead again, but the conversation that they're having here about oh no, he does say Halloween. I lie. I'm so sorry, guys. I said that I never heard that word, but he talks about the amalgamation of various cultural celebrations, Dia de Muertos, Thanksgiving, and of course Halloween. So apparently Thanksgiving isn't like a thing anymore. They're just kind of doing that at the same time, which honestly, considering that like a lot of this is ancestor worship and you're meant to make the foods that they would have loved to put at the table to, like to honor them and invite them to dinner, adding it together with Thanksgiving makes a whole lot of sense. I really kind of like that. I feel like that's something. Anyway, uh Vernon is saying something about like, well, you don't have family, so what do you care? But he counters with like, I have been in isolation, so I know all about loneliness. And then he says, maybe you could apologize to Mr. Kovac for your abysmal showing. It could be characterized more as a fuck up than backup. I don't give a shit about a fucking apology. Where is Kovac? I cannot begin to imagine. I respect his privacy. You hacked his Oni, didn't you? And he says, well, that would be a terrible invasion. That's a yes. Turn on Oni 20. That function is intended only for use when one misplaces the hub, perhaps losing it behind the couch, leaving it in the kitchen. Poe, just turn it on. So that is the bracelet that he dropped when he was in Jacket Off, right? I was not sure what it was when it fell off, and I'm sure we saw it, being given to him in a previous episode, and I just forgot. But this is eventually how, when Kovac is leaving the place, he winds up running directly into Vernon because he is out there with the piece of shit that cut poor Anemone's throat. Um, so jumping back to the torture, I'm not going to do too much of that though, because mostly what I'm here for are the implications of the thing. But what we have here is it's so weird because this dude who is torturing him is like accusing him of being, first he says like, who do you work for, in a general term, but eventually he accuses him of being a cop, and he keeps using this particular name, which I don't recall. It'll come up, I'm sure, in a second. But when this all begins, we jump back in time to Kelchrist's training seminars. I don't even know what else to call them, to be honest. And it's sort of fun because we start off in this like aerial shot of the woods, and you see like coming, the camera is slowly lowering, and there is this protective bubble around the place that we pass through. And so it looks like solid woods, but once you descend beyond a certain point, it's there's a huge like clearing here, and it's being protected by whatever this technology is. And this is her explaining how the torture can work, and the way that she says DHF made it possible to put someone in virtual, torture them to death, and then start again. I don't remember what DHF is. Do we know what that is an acronym for? Or initials? That's not an acronym quite. But this Jeff says I'd call them workshops or training sessions. I really like the idea of this being like her TED Talk. Candace says digital human freight. Right. Freight. That is so depressing. Jesus Christ. Anyway, so she's explaining to them all how this works, and we get to see there's very little of most of the people that are in this group with him so far. We're really focusing on Kovac, this girl that I think is his sister, who is played by the one from Dollhouse, and I'm really like dying for her to have a little bit more to do because I just loved her as an actress. And the way that she is explaining to all of them how this works, it made me really curious, like how much of this do they simply not know, and why do they not know it yet? Because all of these people here have the vibe to them of folks who have been around the block, who know some shit, who have seen stuff. And obviously there is some things that some of them know, but like, how have they been sought out? What exactly caused her to choose them? And this is also a question on Kovac, especially because she winds up finding out that he was involved in something truly horrific, that it feels like it should change everything about how she feels about him. Excuse me. But also, it feels like it has not done that. It's like it's like she wishes it has changed everything about how she feels about him and does not know how to cope with the fact that it hasn't. And this is just a really wild setup because there's this object in the middle of this clearing that looks, for me, it reminds me of like the electrical boxes that would be coming up out of the ground in the condo complex that I lived in as a kid, and it was covered in like a, you know, big green metal box, and we would climb all over it as kids until eventually it was like learned that that was kind of dangerous to your health to be that close to it. But they are all eventually backed against it, and it's like a sort of wheel shape, and they are linked into a system that is a, a training site, basically a virtual training site. And also curious how she got a hold of this, and like exactly how all who's funding all of this, how does this all work, you know? But what it is that she's explaining to them is that there is only one way to get out of this, because you can withstand pain up to a point, but there eventually comes a threshold where everybody breaks. And withstanding the pain isn't really going to do you any good if they could just do this over and over again. Like, what is that proving and who is that helping? So what she's putting them into this virtual reality to do is to withstand some torture that she will be inflicting on them, but also she will be instructing them on how to break this reality, to pull the construct apart and come back into their own body. And also reminding them, as you come up out of your body, shit's going to be getting quite real. You know, like wherever you come out to, you better be prepared, because they are going to be much more like ready for you than you are for them. So eventually, in the present, Kovac is able to pull apart this whole thing by stopping his own heart. And the way he does it is by pulling it out of his own chest and offering it to her. I am going to need a moment. Just first of all, can you like there's just a breastbone. How do you even how do you you know what I'm saying? How do you get in there? I don't feel like you can quite. I'm feeling hard bone. Could you go, you'd have to go from like underneath. I'll have to watch the scene again and see if maybe that's how he does it. If he goes like up underneath his ribs. Maybe you could go from above, but you may as well just like cut your own throat, because that you're gonna be going in by your throat. Yeah, no. I feel like I don't know how this works. And maybe, perhaps, it's that it is virtual reality and he can make it work. Maybe it's that simple. I don't know. But regardless, his actual real body isn't supposed to be affected by this. What the men who are watching this all are monitoring are the places in the brain stack where it lights up to indicate damage is being taken, pain is being felt, whatever. His actual body is not meant to be harmed. So when his real heart stops, that is an emergency that they then have to deal with and bring him up out of it. It's not supposed to happen. And the fact that he was able to do it to himself, they can tell that this isn't a result of the torture. And the idea that you could be tortured like this and your real body just suffers absolutely no effects whatsoever. It's really interesting to think about how often mental health and the results of trauma are treated as sort of like, I don't want to say like unimportant, but they often are not taken quite as seriously as the trauma inflicted physically when you suffer abuse. And there is something about this being completely distanced from real physical harm and the way that you can be like, see, it doesn't really count. It's, it's not, we're not really hurting them. When I have to assume coming back to your body after going through this, all of that trauma is in you still. And you're feeling and reacting as if your body went through that. So it doesn't matter that it wasn't done to you physically. It's just a very good example of how trauma embeds itself, whether or not it was physical. It affects you physically involuntarily. It doesn't have to be, and it still will just become imprinted on you, you know? Anyway, I'm sorry guys, there's so many people chatting. Jeff says, I think they redo Torture 101 after they induct someone. Also, cult leaders tend to repeat themselves a lot. And Renata says, I never thought of them as a cult. And Jeff says, I suppose a revolutionary group and a cult aren't that different at a fundamental level, though revolutionaries should have a more egalitarian mindset. Um, yeah, I feel like cult is fair, you know? This is definitely like she as a person is clearly somebody that they like revere. Um, but anyway, Renata says, I think that it's LOL, it's not real. I always took it as an emotional surrender, not necessarily that him pulling out the heart in VR caused his heart to stop. Okay, yeah, that makes more sense. Um, so I think I'm gonna jump over here to the the beginnings of things with Ortega, because she is talking with the dude who kills Tara and Buffy. He will forever be that guy to me, guys. I don't remember this actor's name. I don't know his name on the show, but that is who I see. And he is the computer nerd here who has found the footage. I had forgotten about this and didn't even mention it when I was covering the episode. But Ortega sees somebody for a moment that is then gone. And she is just sort of like, the fuck was that? And thankfully, they're able to pinpoint a spot in the footage where there is this odd shimmer in the air. And this person, it's not like they have gone in and altered the footage. They have made themselves essentially invisible to the camera somehow, which should not be possible. And I am absolutely dying to know who this is. Um, he's pointing this out and saying like, I have literally never seen anything like that. I heard rumors, but I thought they were bullshit. The distortion is where data was removed. And he says that this is bleeding edge technology. When they ask, like, if he can scale it up, he can block from cam surveillance, he could vanish completely. Practically speaking, he's a ghost walker. And there's a pause, like in Master Mage Search for Dark Dominion. Yeah, yep, that makes sense. So yeah, Asian, medium build, 5'8", maybe 5'10". Guys, was that Kovacs? I don't remember what she saw. I feel like I want to go back and look at it, but I also don't know if there's a point to it. And what would Kovacs what would he even be doing? How would that even, what would, like, I had a lot of questions about this. Um, so, oh yeah, she mentions a mustache, and we didn't see Kovacs with a mustache, so no, I don't think it is him. Uh, she, Ortega begins to ask, like, what if he can erase someone else too? We should take this upstairs. And I love that her partner is like, your proof of a suspect is footage without him in it. It's not thin, it's anorexic, is what the computer text says. How do we make surveillance cams see what can't be seen? And he says, well, I can search for algorithms, and she just tells him to do it. But they both are saying it's a bad idea. Inventory is all up my ass about this missing Hawkeye tracker. I love this. There's this look exchanged because they both know where it is. And she immediately bounces, and I couldn't help but wonder, like, does he notice how uncomfortable and quickly she retreated from the situation? Like, is that he's not getting any red flags from that? Um, and he mentions that he is going to come over for All Hallows for dinner. And he calls her mother by her name, and she says, I want you to stop calling her that. And he says, and I ignore you. And we find out that they are actually Alasni's cooking. Alasni's cooking. Is it that he's calling her by her name? Like, she knows that they're involved, right? Is she aware of it? There's a very strong vibe when they're sitting at the table together, so that I instantly was like, oh, they're together. And I couldn't tell if the fact that they wait until she's gone to like be physically affectionate meant that they were hiding it, or if they were just trying to keep from doing it where she could see because she is such a bad sport about it, or what. Um and exactly how does this work? Like, is this somebody that knew her mother in a different body and now he's in this one, or did they meet because of her? There seems to be a significant age difference, but age in this world is not what it looks like necessarily. So that's also like a factor here. Um, and it just felt to me like they were hiding it, but like she's already got some suspicion. So it was hard for me to tell. Um, and the the scene that we get later when they're bringing in this fucking skinhead, she is on the phone with her mother, who is complaining about the state of her kitchen and how do you cook anything here. And this guy is going on in the background complaining about how uh they can't arrest his Aryan ass and yada yada. Eventually she screams at him to be quiet and he doesn't want to listen, so she zaps him and basically takes his sleeve for the day. Guys, I just want to point out that cops are already fucked up in the way that they treat regular people. And this is like a particularly grim moment where I'm going to take his body for my own reasons for the night. And it'll be discounted, the rental. And then just put it, and I'll also fill the body with like drugs and booze. You know, not that this guy seems to take great care of himself by any means, but this is like, did she actually kill him, or is this just a like a removal and then taking and then putting him back? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, does she put him back into his body after, or does the body just go in storage? um Anyway, the whole like reveal later on when she is shopping on the way home to pick up stuff for her mother, and he is with a completely different posture, just kind of like hovering around her and speaking very fluent Spanish. I loved it so much. I had a moment of just like, hold on, what? And then when I remembered it was All Hallows, I was like, oh, but why that body? And we eventually find out that body rentals are, they do like surge pricing like they do on Uber. Everybody wants bodies tonight. Bodies, bodies, bodies. We got to raise those prices, baby, 30% higher. And the actor managing to pull off like a skinhead in one scene and then an abuela in the other. And this Spanish accent is quite good. He's really pulling it off. I was impressed. This must have been so much fun. Can you imagine? I just always think about this because I've taken like a few acting, I started to go to school for musical theater. So I've taken acting classes a fair amount, and the idea of like getting to switch it up like that, that's always been one of my favorite exercises to play. Being able to jump really quickly from one character to another, like in a moment, fully formed, changing your posture, changing your vocal tics, whatever. And I just always think about how delightful it must be for especially an actor who looks like this. So I would think he probably gets pigeonholed as a fucking like badass troublemaking type all the time. Imagine them being like, yeah, we're going to need you to be that badass troublemaking type, but then also we're going to need you to be this like 97-year-old abuela who's like very excited to see her family. And how he must have been like, is it my birthday? This is super fun. Um, so, and, I was sort of surprised at the way that Ortega did this because I am aware that her mother isn't a fan of the way that we spin people back up. So I was almost thinking like her grandmother allows this? Like I would have expected her, but we find out as she puts it, I was always there at church for the blood of Christ, if you know what I mean. Not for the actual spiritual stuff. She was not a true believer, and so being brought back is totally fine with her. And she's also like she's got a very impatient is the wrong word, but she really kind of goads her daughter overall about how uptight she is being about everything. And Ortega's mom isn't interested in interacting. She doesn't want to say goodbye later. Like, as far as she is concerned, what Ortega has done here is obscene and really disrespectful. And her mother is being selfish and thoughtless. Like, this is the difficult thing when you are dealing with people who have a sincere belief in a religion that you don't. You have to be able to like think the way they do for a moment in order to understand how they can be so unwavering in their reaction to things. So if you are in the mind of a woman who genuinely believes in heaven and hell, who genuinely believes in a God that would punish being spun back up, I could see how you are sort of thinking one day I will be able to rejoin my parents in heaven. And then you find out that your mother actually specifically did something to make it so that she won't be there when you get there. And for us, this feels like fairy tale stuff a lot of the time. And when I say us, I mean those of us who are not believers. And I say this way because most of my listenership are not fervent Christians. So nothing against you if you are, but it's just not most of my listeners. And I feel like pretty comfortable being able to say that. But if you aren't somebody who believes, it just feels very ridiculous and very like a fairy tale. Like it feels almost like a little kid having a tantrum over you not believing in their imaginary friend. And it is so important to be able to like set that aside and really understand that this is a genuine belief that is like bone deep for some people. And when you laugh at it or make light of it, it's super hurtful in a way that is difficult to like fully understand if you don't have a belief like this. That and so to her mother has basically just like given God the finger and said she doesn't care about seeing her in the afterlife, and said screw it to everything, which sucks. I don't really know if I lived in this universe how I would feel about all of this either. I've said before, like the way the neo Catholics are being painted, a part of me is sort of like, I can understand feeling that way. I I just the grossness of how the commercialism has sprung up surrounding souls now is very difficult to swallow. And even if I weren't somebody who really believed in, like, a punishment from God, I would still have a lot of reservations in general. So it just leads to this incredibly tense evening. And even though the kids are very much enjoying their abuela, who swears freely in front of them and is just, she's really something. Uh, Mom is not entertained. She finds this really upsetting. Her brother also clearly does not like this. And there's the usual kind of argument about, like, whether or not this is a an ethical thing to do, or Ortega arguing about how murder victims and rape victims getting to, like, point at the person who did it to them, that they should have the right to do that, and him arguing over that. And it's a no-win situation, because there is no logical way to argue with a religious belief. The point of it is that it's not founded in logic, and that's what's supposed to be beautiful about it. It's also what makes it insanely frustrating, but it's about faith, and any sort of logic you apply, like, why? Just don't. It's just a waste of everybody's time. So, it's just one of those that the argument goes nowhere, as it always does. Um, and eventually she brings her mother back to the station, or her grandmother, and her grandmother asks to try some drugs because she's never done it before. So they get all fucked up. And the scene between them eventually ends with her grandmother asking her not to be spun back up the next year, and saying, "It really is, it's time for me to go." And it was really moving, because it's her getting a chance to say goodbye, and her grandmother choosing to move on. It reminded me a lot of the end of The Good Place. And if you guys haven't watched it, highly recommend. It starts off a little bit rocky for me. It was hard for me to get into it initially, but once you start to understand, like, what we're doing, it's a fascinating show. That manages to be really funny while also dealing with some very big concepts. And I there was something very sad to me as well about the fact that Ortega is very clearly the last person in her family to really think that this is okay. And so once her grandmother is truly gone, it seems like she's going to be kind of alone in her thinking, and is going to feel rather isolated. Um, so Yeah, that was it was touching, and the two of them, like, the fact that she's here, like, cuddling with this skinhead, it is very, very funny. So that's that. Um and of course we have her mother and Mahmoud having the little, like, moment of how can we, like, understand when we don't even worship the same God, and when did life become so complicated? And he said, like, when God put man on earth, basically, when he created human beings. I don't know about that choice, God. It really feels like we've got some, we're still sort of beta testing. Um, all right, so let's jump back to the fucking torture scenes, which I keep on trying to avoid. This is the point where Kovac is looking over and realizing that the faces are glitching that he is seeing. Um, and he says, "You know what they call people with personality frag where I'm from? Fucking insane. Where you come from? You are not an alien then. We make progress." So let's jump into this scene with Kelchrist, because the whole, like, the way that their relationship works between the two of them is so distant feeling still. And eventually when he's in this room and he is like being strung up. There's also a bunch of Praetorians in here that she tells him to like make them disappear. He manages to shoot them at first, and she's like, "Yeah, well, there are some situations that shooting doesn't get you out of it. You have to actually like delete them." And when she had been describing the torture that this woman suffered, she tells the story about how it had been going on and on and on. And eventually she like overcame the construct. And she says, her name was Iphigenia, but she calls her Iffy. Um, they thought they had broken her. And Kovac says then she asked to see the top brass, said she'd only confess to them. And you see her face kind of drop because she's realizing if he's saying this, then he has to have firsthand knowledge. She got the top 17 SeaTac officers on planet into a room with her in the real. They didn't know she'd been implanted with enzyme-triggered explosives. The enzyme was Fury related. When they all came and gathered around waiting for her to betray her fellow rebels, she let herself get angry. She turned the room and the surrounding 50 square meters into ash. Her last words, strapped to the interrogation table where they'd raped and killed her over and over again. That's fucking enough. And the idea of having fury triggered explosives embedded in your body, the amount of self-control that you would have to be tortured that many times and not set them off. Can like I'm not even talking about resisting the torture at that point. I'm talking about keeping the fury at bay while that's happening. Raped repeatedly and not letting that come to the surface. I mean, I guess the fact is that she wasn't in her body, so it's not meant to actually affect her body, but like even if she weren't being tortured while this was, that's just a daily thing that she's walking around with in her body. Guys, I don't know about you, but I'm out here just getting angry all the time over very little. It's tiring. I don't love it. I am trying to like cope with it. But if you told me that there was something implanted in my body that would cause a massive explosion if I let myself get too angry, I don't feel like I would make it to the end of the week, frankly. Like, that is bananas. That is some control that I don't understand. Um so yeah, and it's, very clear to me when he says all of this, when he shares the part of the story that he knows, this is him making a confession to her that I was there and fully taking responsibility for it. So they all start to get locked into this system. And she says, all of the rebels who know about Iffy were killed. The only ones who would remember what happened. And he says, were the interrogation team loaded in from off-site. So he was part of the interrogation team. And she says, she was my friend. And he says, I should have died with her. She says, why didn't you? And he says, they sent me out, not high ranking enough. And as all of this is being chatted on, his sister to his left is listening to the whole thing. She has not fully like put her little, whatever they're called, diodes. I am really curious what it means to her to know, whether she already knew. Like, how much of this was she aware of? Um, So let's see. He says, was it different because you could put a face on one of the dead? Um, why does he say that? You knew what I was when you let me in. That's what it is. Was it different because you could put a face on one of the dead? Basically, like, you were aware of my job and agreed that I could be part of this, and now you're mad? Like, it's in the hypotheticals of you were involved in these sorts of interrogations, it was fine. But now that you can think of a specific person that I did something to, the game has totally changed for you, huh? And it has. And that is human nature. It is a completely different thing to know something in a hypothetical. They did a thing to a person versus they did this thing to me, to my friend, to somebody that I got to hear a lot about in general, like, so that I got to know them, you know? Um, so, all right, I'm going to jump ahead here because long story short, in the real, Kovac does manage to get himself out of the construct. And the way that he did it in the training was, she's like, you need to think about something that means a lot to you and let yourself like be vulnerable. And if you gnaw off your own foot like that, then you will manage to get out. So we see him present, like, he comes down off of the wall. He manages to get out of these like handcuffs and comes toward her and kisses her and gets her to like drop the knife that she was going to use on him. And I really kind of thought that she might go after him anyway, but she doesn't. And she he says like that she is just doing this to try and prove to herself that she doesn't care about him, when really she clearly does. And she tries to say, well, I don't care about you. But he just looks at her and says, I think you're going to show me how to break out of the simulation next. And focus on what you care about most in this world with every atom of your existence. There it is. Rip yourself open, and you can rip a hole in the virtual world. That is how you get back to the real. And he just looks at her and then kisses her. I'm just going to say it again. This man is fine as fuck. Both Kovacs. Too goddamn hot. It's too much. It's too much, frankly. God. So she drops the knife. I'm not mad at it. And she pulls away and says, I can't. And then they come back to themselves. He is out here in the, like with the rest of the group. All of them are already done and have already gotten out, except for him. And they're just sort of making fun of him because they thought he would be apparently he has a reputation of being like the biggest badass out of everybody. But his sister has a much more defensive vibe about her because she heard what they were talking about and knows what was going on. And Kelchris comes up to him and is just like really pissed that he pulled that. But she can't deny that it was effective. He called her bluff. That shit was real. So sorry for it. Um, so once he comes out of his fake torture, it's really, that's not accurate because that is some real torture. He tells all of these guys, because they're just like, still convinced that he is this person the guy is looking for and just managing to withstand the torture. And he tells them, you dumb motherfuckers just abducted and tortured a SeaTac officer. I don't know if we know what this means yet, but he says this and he definitely gets immediately under their skin with this. Do you have any idea what they're going to do to you? They're going to hunt you down. Make what you did to me look like a tropical cruise. Rip your stacks out and feed them to the shredder. They're going to kill your families, friends, dogs, cats, and fucking goldfish. When the Russian asks why would they be in Licktown, he says there's a biopirate operation moving stolen military inventory out of places like Jacket Off. And he manages to get them believing enough that they turn against each other. He says, whichever one of you that lets me free lives, the other two, you won't even be in memory. So both of these guys immediately attempt to save themselves by letting him free as quickly as they can. Spoilers, he does not let anybody live. He shoots everybody with this fucking gun, this like cannon. And honestly, it is so incredibly satisfying. The fact that he goes around and shoots every single one of them a second time? Correct. That is the way to fucking be. I don't care that they're already clearly dead. Killer stacks, get them out. Done. I don't even care, honestly, if this were set in the real world and they didn't even have stacks. I'd be fine with shooting them a second time anyway, just because fuck them. These people are just absolute fucking maniacs. They're monsters. So he shoots them, puts the guns in this fucking pink little backpack, looking so insanely hot, with this pink rainbow backpack that says Hello Unicorn on the back. And he walks out of there and shoots everybody in the next room too. We see all the blood spraying. Eventually, he blows the entire place up. And somehow he manages to like walk out of there unscathed despite this explosion, which I know is from a gun, but still I would think he would take more damage than he does. And he's carrying the sleeve of the Russian, its head. He kills the bouncer from the whorehouse, and I believe shoots him in such a way that he blows his stack out. And later on, we find out that the tracker that was implanted in him was left in the lab in the hand of a corpse with its middle finger up, the corpse of the Russian, which is truly just a work of art. And the whole, it's remarkable, you guys, because like watching this scene as he is absolutely laying every living being within a 20-foot radius out on the ground. You just feel so hyped that he is out of here, and he is also killing the disgusting pieces of shit that are doing what they're doing in this facility. But when later Ortega gets summoned to the scene and is looking around, the grimness of it feels so different. And I am not apologizing, and I don't regret it. But it is very funny when she's like, he did this. I understand why she's reacting the way she is in a vacuum, but because we know what it was that they were doing, every single one of those people deserved what they got without reservation and no question whatsoever in my mind. So when she eventually goes back to the Raven and is yelling at him, and he just says, I should get a fucking medal for shutting that place down, I was so glad that he said it that way, because he could have just like immediately launched into, do you know what they were doing in there? But he doesn't. Just saying I should have gotten a medal, I feel like it makes the case. It immediately, she sort of seems to stop and like realize that there was more to this than she knew at the time. It just felt like the exact type of wording to stop her in her tracks. And all of this is just, there's not a single person in this place that it's like you're all part of a system. It doesn't matter if you were personally doing the torturing. You know what's happening here, and you are taking a paycheck. And I know that we live in a capitalist system, but we have to have fucking like, we have to have a scrap of moral integrity here. It's like ICE workers. And I don't mean like ICE road truckers. I mean immigration, like prison guards, basically. I'm sorry, but there isn't a good person that works for them. There isn't. I'm so sorry, but no. It's like cops. Y'all are part of this rotten system, and you cannot possibly be part of it, like functioning as a worker getting a paycheck, if you are not complicit, because if you were fighting against it, you would be expelled from the organization. That's how that works. So I don't believe you. There's no goods. There's none. It cannot work. The function of the system wouldn't work if there were good ones mixed in there, because that's exactly, like, so yeah, no, kill them all, and I'm not mad about it. Um, so anyway, when she comes and finds him, he finally is like, you know what? I think that tracker was in me before I was put into this sleeve, which means that you were tracking the sleeve, not me. It wasn't even about me. He kept calling me Riker, and she insists, oh, he's nobody. He's nobody. But he keeps cutting up the sleeve and damaging it, and using his own body as like a hostage against her. It's so odd. Eventually starts to cut his own throat, and she finally stops, and she begins to cry, and she says, Riker was my partner. When he says and, she says no, and he digs the knife in, and then she's like, all right, fine, oh, fine, I'll tell you, just please stop. And she says, I'll tell you everything. And that's the end of the episode. So, yeah, I am very curious. I didn't think that the body was a thing that, she clearly had like a weird fixation with him that I didn't fully understand, but it didn't occur to me that it was about the sleeve. So, oh my God, Renata says, I'm sorry we have to wait another month for the next ep, but it's going to be great. Oh, I didn't know it was that long. Agony. Oh, all right. Well, I'll just have to sit tight. All right, guys, I have to wrap up. I'm over time, as I so often am. But thank you guys again so much for listening. Appreciate you all. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.